Hello there, I'm Dominic St-Pierre and you're listening to Go Podcast. Today I'm joined by Matt Boyle and we talk about the steps you may take to get your conference talk accepted. Hey there, this is Dominic and I have a guest this week. Matt, thank you very much for joining me for the second time on this episode.
Hey Dom, it's great to be here again. How's everything going?
Very good. I think my English will be a challenge today for me for some reason, but let's see. We will see. So we'll talk about conferences. So for those that don't know Matt, so if you can return a couple of episodes. Well, I don't have the number. We'll have that on the show notes. But Matt came. I think it was around 34 or something like that. So you can go back there. But we will talk about conferences talk today. This is interesting to me. This is something I've never done, actually.
Yeah, it's. I must be honest, it's something that's relatively new to me. I've done lots of smaller talks and things like that, but this year seems to be the year I've decided to throw myself into doing a little bit more conference speaking, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of why that is. But generally, it's a great way to learn some new skills, and it's something that I was. I guess a little bit apprehensive about doing, but I feel much better about now that I've done a couple. So I definitely want to see if I can encourage some of your listeners to give it a go too.
Absolutely, yeah. When do you think that it should be a good moment for someone to say, you know what, I might want to start trying to do a talk? Because let's be honest, for almost everyone, this is extremely intimidating, and the good moment might never happen. So you might be waiting for a long time, and it might be something that you want to jump early, but this is also dangerous. So when do you think it's the proper way, the proper time to do that?
I think if, at any point is the right time to start thinking about speaking. Honestly, I think people get. Including myself, get overwhelmed with, I guess, some of how high quality and some of the technical depth that goes on with some of the other talks you might see shared around. But you have to remember that, especially in the Go community, there's a real range of experience. So, even if you're a junior engineer or fairly new to the language, you'll have something interesting to say. Like, for example, a talk titled "My Transition to Go from Java," or "My First Year of Go," or what I learned from what I brought with me to writing Go from my experience with JavaScript. I love those talks, and everybody's experience is completely different. So regardless of where you're at with your journey, I think it's worth considering. At least going through the process of preparing talks, practicing them, and maybe giving them at work and applying to conferences with them, because it'll give you a really great opportunity to grow a skill set in engineering that I think is incredibly important and sometimes undervalued, and that is the soft skills. Being a great engineer isn't just about programming, it's about being able to communicate your ideas effectively too to different stakeholders with different skill sets. And I think speaking at conferences is a really great way to get better at that.
Absolutely. This is interesting that you're saying that, because I mean it's also and most of the programmer or engineers might be, we are not extrovert. I am not an extrovert per se, for sure. So, I mean, it's kind of scary to jump in. Would you say that might be a good way to start inside maybe a local, a local meetup? Maybe that would that be the first step to that you would, I don't know, say that the proper step, compared to just jumping into a 300 people room, might be extremely rough at first.
Yeah, I would say start even smaller than that. I think for most folks, getting comfortable with speaking is getting comfortable speaking in front of even your colleagues and your friends first. So if you do decide that you want to go down this route and speaking is something that interests you, step one is to maybe attend a few conferences and get familiar with the process and how it works. But before applying to them, if you don't feel comfortable going straight to that, a really great way to get more comfortable is to maybe speak at company meetings. A lot of the companies I work at have some sort of forum where you can share work you've done, or perhaps you have sprint demos at the end of your 2-week sprint, and you could, ask for an opportunity to present the work that your team had done. Something that anyone can do at any company, if it doesn't exist, is set up some sort of like lunch and learn, which is always really appreciated everywhere I've worked, is to say, hey, every last Friday of the month at lunchtime, we're going to do a lunch and learn where you can sign up ahead of time and talk about something you're excited about, some work you did. And these are effectively almost mini conference talks, right? You say, hey, I solved this problem for us, and this is how I did it, and this is what I learned. So that's a really great way to get comfortable doing so. And it's doing so in an environment you're comfortable with, because hopefully your colleagues and your friends who may be there are your big advocates. So they're going to give you good feedback and support you no matter how it goes, which I must say is actually my experience of conferences too. I think it can be very overwhelming to think, there's 300 people or there's 1,000 people in the audience. But they're actually all on your side. And it takes once you've done a couple of conferences, you really do realize that everyone's there to support you, and no one's there to pick flaws in your talk or anything. They really are there to learn. And, if you do trip over your words or say something that wasn't completely correct because you panicked and got nervous, folks are generally really supportive and are there to kind of pick you back up. And I think once you've done this a couple of times, you start to realize that, and it's a really nice feeling to know that you're presenting to peers and people who do want you to do well.
Yes. What are those format that you're mentioning? So I'm not very aware. I never really work at big company to have those lunch demo and whatnot. So do you have like a screen, a big screen, and you're kind of presenting before them, or it's more like casual, just sharing your screen and whatnot?
Yeah, it could be either. So at Cloudflare, we used to do these things in the office where we would invite everyone in the office to come to, we have an auditorium area, and that would be a very formal, almost like a conference talk, where there'd be a big screen with a projector, and you would present to whoever was interested to come along. That was really nice. That's a really great way to prepare for a conference. If your company's more remote, like Cloudflare is now, you could just do it on Google Hangouts or Zoom, and exactly that, just share your screen, maybe walk through a deck, maybe do some code demos. I think the main thing you want to be practicing for is how to structure your talk and how to tell a story. I think that's the best advice I can give, is whatever you're doing, whether it's a sprint demo or whether it's a formal conference talk, is turn it into a story. What was the problem you were trying to solve? What did the world look like before you did this thing? What did you identify as the issues? Like, how did you fix it? And what did you learn? And what the next steps are? If you take that format for pretty much anything, you'll tell a really great story, and people will come with you, because no matter how technically hard something is, they'll understand the problem you were trying to solve. And even if they don't understand the technical bit in the middle about exactly what you did, because maybe it's a really complicated and hard thing to do, they'll appreciate and empathize with the problem you were going after, which I think is half the battle with these things.
Yeah. Also, I would say that, yeah, conference talk and just being out there. So there were this mindset a long time ago. So I remember around 2003, 4, 5, whatever. There were this idea of being a better developer or something like that. There was this phrase that people were saying all over the place. And back then it was like, start a blog, just trying to share your what you are doing, share your knowledge. You have some expertise and whatnot. I mean, this is probably also a good first step if you are not doing that, because and this is a strange time that we are in. I know that blogs might not be as popular as they were before, but they are still valuable, and it could also be a first step if you if you want to just get out there and at some point level up and reach the conference, I guess. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and I think I would still encourage every software engineer to start a blog. Anyway, it's great for a bunch of reasons, but I think if you think about where we're going, and if you believe we're going to be more remote in the future rather than less remote, which is my belief, then there's kind of three things you need to be a great software engineer in a remote first world. One is going to be a great verbal communicator, one is going to be a great written communicator, and one is going to be the technical skills. And I think generally people, they know they need to be technically great, and they do lots of great work to ensure that they're getting technically better all the time. But it's very easy to kind of reach a point where your work might be excellent, but you're not doing a great job of communicating what you're working on. And I think that's where if you've got a good track record of blogging and you do a good job of sharing updates asynchronously with your company, and also you can run a meeting and can get across technical ideas to varying audiences, I think that's when you'll have a truly great career. And I see this all the time. I see people who are great communicators can accelerate their career like really quickly, I think. So if you are someone who doesn't feel as confident writing your ideas down or speaking, then blogging and doing conference and meetup talks is a really great way to improve these skills over time, especially if you get to do it at a session where you're going to get feedback off people, or you can do it to people you trust. And you'll also grow your network, right? I think where we're going, especially at the moment, it's very much a employer's market. I feel like there's very few job roles open, and there's lots and lots of people applying for them. So it's really hard. I think I especially empathize with new graduates who maybe don't have any experience and looking for their first role. I think it's a really tough time to be entering the workforce. So you need to differentiate yourself, right? And a really great way to do that is to have, maybe you've got some open source projects on GitHub, but if you have a blog of all these interesting things you've explored too, and you can demonstrate that you're, that you're growing your technical skills and you can talk about them, and maybe you've done a couple of talks at meetups or just publish them on YouTube. You don't necessarily need to go to a conference. You'll start to grow your network, and you might find that doing these things leads to you getting sort of job offers or interviews, at least, just because your name's out there a little bit. So it can give you a unique advantage as well in what is a pretty tough market.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I remember when I first started my blog, it was very, very early, and I think my first article was something like how to send an email with C#. And back then, maybe it was like, I don't know, 2002 or something like that. And I was a junior developer at that time. So, I mean, it does not really matter what you are writing about. There is people, there is developers out there that are at the same level as you are, and they are probably searching for what you are doing, actually. And it's just a matter of sharing. So of course, I was not expecting to have any senior engineers to see my blog, but you know what? I got comments, and it really started for me at that point where I said to myself, there's a value to just share the knowledge, and also it's extremely valuable for you as well as a software engineer. You just by explaining something, it helps you. First of all, it helps you to understand it better, and there's no, you're not forced to write on extremely hard and complicated topic. There has to be content for everyone, I believe.
Yeah, totally. I think if you watch the conference talk I gave at Singapore, it's not actually technically difficult. It's quite simple Go that I was talking about, but I guess the more interesting element of it that resonated with people is I was telling a story and solving a problem. So to your point, like, you don't need to be, if you feel like you're not blogging because you don't think you have anything interesting to say, I promise that you're wrong. Like, I'm really interested to hear in lots of different varying experiences of problems you might face globally, or maybe things that are only unique to you that you've had to solve problems for. And it might be that you didn't have to write very complicated code, but that doesn't mean it's not interesting. The number one question I get asked in like my Twitter DMs is, what should I build? Like, I'm I've got X amount of years in Go. Sometimes it's a really large amount. It's like I've got 5, 6, 7 years, but I just don't have any ideas for projects. And so when other people share the things that they've done and the things they've worked on, people are like really excited about that. It's like, oh, this is really cool. I never really thought of solving that specific problem this way. And here's a concrete example. So I recently bought an electric car, and I'm having some problems where the every time I charge it, the fuse in my house keeps blowing. So I keep having to like reset the fuse to charge it, which is like very annoying. So I've called the electric company, and they said that they can't really do anything about it because when they came to measure the voltage, which is what's causing it to trip, it's all in range. However, I bought a smart plug, and I can see that it's actually not in range all the time. It's in range when they came to measure it by pure chance, but like very early in the morning and at varying points, like it actually goes outside of the boundaries of what they're supposed to do, and so it trips. So I called them again, and they said, well, we need evidence of this. So I bought some smart plugs, and I set up a Prometheus instance, and I'm pushing all of the voltage information to a Prometheus instance to build a graph. And so once I've gathered a few weeks of data, I sent it back to them, and I said, here's some evidence that it's going outside of range. Here's the raw information, and here's a pretty graph which shows it. And they've actually accepted that as evidence. So now they're going to come out and see if they can do something to reduce the voltage. So I think the code I wrote was about 10 lines. It's just a metric, just some stuff to push it from the smart plug to Prometheus and just normalize it a little bit. And that's going to be enough to kind of solve a problem that I faced. Not particularly a hard problem. It was interesting to do, and it was in a slightly new domain for me. But, it's just one example of where you can find a local problem to you that could be interesting. And I think if I write about this, people might be interested. And, maybe one day I'll do even a conference talk or a small meetup talk on this, because I think it tells a story from beginning to end, which I think, in my opinion, make the best conference talks.
That is incredible. This is nice. This is very cool. I just want to take an opportunity to return a little bit to what you have said earlier, and regarding graduate and junior developer. I'm looking at doing a podcast episode with. I would like to have 5 junior developers, and just do some roundup question to see how they are doing, and what are their challenges and whatnot, and I'm extremely interested in knowing were there any hard question for them to say, what, should I go into engineering or should I find something else? I'm extremely interested into that topic. So I'm just saying that to if there's any listener that if you have I don't know, 2 or 3 years in, I want to talk to you, especially if you are just started. I'd like to do that. And yes, to return to our topic, if you are not ready to do talk, I mean, there's so many things that you can do. Although returning to what to build, this problem is real. I mean, I've been programming for the half of my life now, and I want to jump into Rust, into Zig. I don't know what to build. This is a genuine problem, to be frank. I think when you are mastering what you are doing for a certain time, you are just flying. You can build almost anything, but as soon as you go down into I would say closer to the kernel, whatever, it's getting harder to know what to build, because now you're not really mastering this environment.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. I mean, I must admit that's it's not my strong suit. I always tend to stay more at the application layer. I really like solving human problems, if you will, like have very clear customer outcomes. For example, the silly example I gave a moment ago with my electric car, it solves a very specific and real problem for me. And I think the closer you get to sort of system programming and the kernel, is the more you're probably thinking about solving very, very difficult and probably enterprise level challenges, right? Which I think is Rust does a great job for. So I think if you want to learn specific languages like that, it could be it could be tough if you want to focus on like specific APIs. But I think where in my opinion, a lot of people get it a little bit wrong, is don't worry about learning a specific part of a language or a specific library to start with. Just focus on writing lots and lots of code. And the best way to do that is work on things you're excited about or have like very clear sort of tangible outcomes to you. So I wrote a blog post about this with some suggestions of what to build. So maybe we could link that in the show notes. But generally, really small things like I built, one of the first things I built when I learned Go was I built a Telegram bot that sends me a message every morning letting me know what the weather is today. It's really simple, but it's been running now for like 7 years. It still sends me a message every morning, which is cool. And I do find it useful. So no one's gonna win any awards for writing applications like that. But I learned a ton doing it, and it got me excited about the language and saw how to put basic things together. So, for the first 5 or 10 projects, I would really prioritize just doing things like that, just getting yourself familiar with writing things and getting excited about what the language can do for you. And then if you want to go and pick a specific, like a specific package, maybe in the Go library, you would say, I want to learn concurrency, so I'm going to go learn about error groups. That makes sense. But I would do that after you're like really familiar and sort of bought into the language is my view.
Totally. Yeah. I did that as well. Focusing on a small thing recently. For me, it was the HTML templates. I decided to write myself a small library because I was getting tired to wonder every time how did I did that on the last thing, and I did a small detour in the last 6 months in Django, and I must admit that I really appreciated the way that the templates were just handled. So that's something when you are as well looking around on other languages and other way to work, you can also bring a couple of idea to Go, for example, and just say, you know what, this could be improved, and I will take care of that, and this makes for a good GitHub project, and probably something that might be worth talking to a conference as well, depending on the size of the library that you're building.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great idea.
Do you have tips on how to choose or how to select the first conference that one should start to?
Yeah, so it might be a little bit backwards, but I actually don't think you necessarily need to worry about which conference you're going to apply for first. And I think even if you haven't identified a conference yet, you should work on putting together a paper. So when conferences are looking for people to speak, they do this thing called call for papers, or CFPs. You'll hear it like acronized as. And when that happens, you basically have to follow a pretty standardish template on proposing what your talk might look like. So another one I'll link in the show notes, but Dave Cheney in 2017 put together one of the best blog posts I've seen on how to write a successful conference proposal. And I've always used this. I use this template, and it's been very successful for me. It's a really, really great post, so I'll share that below. None of it's rocket science. It all makes sense, but it's really nice to see it all just sort of outlined in very, very clear English on what people who are reviewing papers, which Dave used to do, are looking for. So writing a proposal with an idea you have you can do that anytime. You don't necessarily need to have a conference to aim for. And then there's a website called Sessionize, which again we'll link to below, which seems to have become very popular for finding papers, like places to apply for, like conferences that are open and have call for papers open. And you can set up alerts there too to notify you when conferences that are interesting to you are open. So for example, I've got an alert set up for like distributed systems and for Golang. And so I get an email a couple of times a month maybe like, hey, this conference might be interesting to you. So that's a really good way to figure out what's available and what's coming up. Also, following the Go4Con accounts on Twitter is a good idea. They publish straight away on Twitter when, and probably LinkedIn, I imagine too, but I don't spend too much time on there, when conferences are available and they're looking for papers. So that would be my first tip. And once you use these platforms, you can submit your CFP in there. So you can type your proposal up, you can put it inside the tool, and then you can actually apply to multiple conferences very easily, like using a drop-down. So, you don't need to come up with a unique talk every time. Because one thing I will say is don't be dejected if your talk gets rejected from one conference. It doesn't mean it's a bad talk. It might just not have been a fit for what the organizers were trying to do for that specific conference. And a concrete example of that is my talk that ended up being the keynote talk at GopherCon in Singapore actually got rejected by 3 other conferences before it was the keynote there. So, one person's rejection is another conference keynote. So don't be dejected if you don't get it accepted straight away. Ask your friends and people who have spoken before for feedback before maybe you submit it if you are unsure. I'm always happy to give feedback on people's conference proposals, so reach out to me on Twitter and I'd be more than happy to give some feedback on it before you submit it. And then if you do get rejected, just don't be too upset about it, and pick yourself up and see what other conferences it could be a good fit for.
That is such good advice. I mean, this is incredible. Those tools seems to be great. And how are you preparing then? Let's say you have you found the conference and your talk is accepted. I guess now it's time to write the talk or things like that. What is your process? How do you do that? And usually how much time it takes for you to be exactly prepared before the talk?
Yeah, it takes a really long time. I would be lying if I said it didn't. So you need to make sure that you've got a lot of time sort of outlined to put together a talk. I think as a general rule, especially if you're doing a technical talk where you need to prepare a demo, I would assume that you need sort of 4 to 5 hours per every minute of conference talk. So, if you're going to spend 25 minutes talking, I would roughly assume that you're probably going to spend, maybe that estimate's bad, but if you're going to do a 25-minute talk, I would expect that you could easily spend 2 full work weeks, so 40, 60, 70 hours putting everything together that you need, practicing and getting ready for it. At least if you're newer in the journey like I am. People like Bill Kennedy's a really famous person in the Go community. I've seen him give incredible talks with very little prep, just because he's so used to doing it, and he's got his content down. So at Singapore, in GovCon in Singapore, there was a kind of a spare slot, and Bill was just like, "I'll do a talk," and he gave probably the most interesting and energetic talk that I saw at the conference all day. So, some people, it's like anything, as you practice it, you get better at it. And, people like Bill are great people to watch while you're practicing and learning, because he just does a great job of being really high energy and really entertaining. And I think that's equally as important as the content of your talk. So not everybody has to be a Bill Kennedy. You don't have to be incredibly energetic. It might not be in your personality, but I would recommend certainly watching other people talk like Bill, and as well as people like Dave Cheney, who has a different speaking style, and even some of the Go team. They've got different speaking styles again, and see what fits for you and what maybe aligns better with your personality. Once you've kind of figured out roughly what you want to talk about, and maybe you've watched a few speakers and figured out how your presentation needs to look, my best advice would be to get to presenting as quickly as possible. And what I mean by that is, what my process is to start with some Apple Notes. I just make a quick, very quick high-level bullet points, where roughly a bullet point represents a slide, which is like, this is what I want to cover on this slide. This is what I want to talk about. And then what I'll do is I'll transfer them into, I tend to use, it's called Google Sheet, Google, I forget what the presentation tool in Google's called, whatever that's called, slides, I guess. Yeah. And, I make very ugly slides with the content that I want to be covered on that slide, and I'll start practicing speaking. And the reason I do this is you'll find as you start practicing, your talk is either way longer than you thought it was going to be, it's way shorter than you thought it was going to be, or there's bits that just don't click together as well as you thought and they don't follow. So one mistake I see often people make is they start making slides and they make them beautiful and they spend a ton of time making them really, really pretty. And then they realize their talk doesn't really flow and they have to cut a bunch out or add a bunch more content. And you spend a lot of time doing what I would consider to be the last thing you want to do before they've kind of got comfortable with their presentation. So my advice would be get to the point where you're practicing regularly with very, very ugly slides. And then once you're really happy and you've given your talk 5, 6, 7, 8 times comfortably, then you can start to make them pretty if you want to. But again, if you look at my slides from the talks I've given, my slides never really make it to being that pretty. Mine are all pretty ugly, honestly. I keep them very simple because I really want people to focus on what I'm saying rather than looking at my slides.
Yeah. Yeah, to return to Bill, Bill is a machine. I mean, yes. Um, I wanted to prepare. I added a couple of episodes ago, and I wanted to share a Google Docs with him, and I said, we could brainstorm there. He said, well, you know what? Let's jump on a call directly, and I was like, cool. Yeah, I hear on that. Very very good advice. That is interesting. Do you have any kind of I know that people that give talks told me that sometimes they do have like a timer of some sort that they see themselves on the slide itself. Do you have that yourself?
Yeah, so if you use Google Slides for your presentation, when you put it in speaker mode, it allows you to see some speaker notes, and as part of those speaker notes, it will have a timer. A lot of conferences will enforce having a timer, and they'll usually enforce a time limit too. Some conferences at the back of the conference, they'll have a light that comes on when you've got like 5 minutes left, or someone will hold up a sign to let you know. So they'll do their best to prompt you and keep you on track. But generally, if you use Google Slides, in the top right corner, there's a button where you can use Speaker View. And most conferences, if you are working from slides, you probably want to use Speaker View because then you can see speaker notes, you can see the deck, and you can see the timer as well.
Nice. So when people are saying things like, "Oh, you know what? I wrote this talk yesterday in the plane," they are they are lying, or they are not really prepared for their talk.
I think it depends, doesn't it? Because I feel pretty confident that Bill could write a talk on a plane and it would still be exceptional. I couldn't do that. I think my advice is very much catered to beginners. If you're just starting out, like, don't do that. Give yourself sort of 4 to 6 weeks of runway before you talk and try and spend a couple of hours on it each day. I'd also recommend not trying to just do it like in 20 hours in one go. Like spreading it out, and little and often repetition is how you'll become comfortable and better with your content. So try and practice little and often where you can, which kind of goes hand in hand with the advice of getting to the point where you're practicing and rehearsing as fast as possible and not worrying too much about your slides is my best advice. Last thing while we're talking about slides as well is try not to put too much content on them. People can one bad habit I see sometimes is people will put their content as text on the slide. Yeah. So you're going to talk about 5 things, you put 5 bullet points, and it just says exactly what you're going to say. If you do that, people will read your slide instead of listening to you. So generally keeping your slides as minimalist as possible, maybe reinforcing your point, maybe it has an image or a code snippet on there, makes tons of sense. But try not to just put all of your speaker notes onto the slide. The most text-heavy slides I tend to use is like the final slide, which is like the wrap-up or the lessons I want people to take away. It makes sense to have some text on there, and you'll probably see people maybe pull out their phones to take pictures of that slide if you take that approach. But apart from that, you probably don't want to have like a whole bunch of text on any of your decks.
Yeah, it's pretty distracting, to be frank. I can understand that. How are you practicing? You're saying rehearsing and whatnot. I mean, do you do it for yourself? Do you record yourself and you're listening to yourself after that before presenting that to a first real human, or you're jumping to your colleague maybe and things like that? How do you start that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first few rehearsals will just be me. So I'll put my slides in speaker notes, and I'll practice speaking while trying to stick to the time limit. Once I'm comfortable with my talk, it's within the time limit, and I'm happy with the content. Usually what I do is I record myself speaking. So, I've been making courses for Bite Size Go. So I use a tool for that called Screen Studio, which records kind of your face and the deck at the same time. So usually what I'll do is I'll record myself doing that, and I'll share it with a bunch of people that I trust whose feedback that I want. Get some feedback from them. And then as I get closer and closer to the conference, I'll practice either by doing it at work. So I'll ask folks to join a call and I'll be like, hey, I'm going to give my conference talk. Can I get some last minute feedback? And I'll also practice at home by just, what I tend to do is I've got a standing desk. So as I get closer and closer to the day, I'll practice like standing up and treating the desk like a lectern, which is typically what I'd stand behind if I'm doing one where I need to do a code demo and I need to be at my computer. One that's another piece of advice I would give, and this is advice I've learned myself recently. I didn't do a good job with this, but I recently went to a conference where the stage was very, very big, and the way that AV was set up was that they kind of wanted speakers to use the stage. So there was quite a lot of people before me, speakers who were excellent, and they had really high energy, and they moved around the stage as they spoke. But I hadn't really practiced in that environment, so I didn't really feel comfortable doing it on the spot. I didn't want to walk around the stage. So I kind of was pretty static, and I think it made... I think the content and the way I delivered the talk was okay, but I think my energy seemed lacking just because I wasn't prepared to walk around the stage, and I didn't want to try and do it for the first time on the day. So, make sure you're familiar with what the setup might look like. You can do this by watching previous year's talks and maybe looking at the venue and seeing what it looks like, and, make sure you're prepared to potentially use the stage if it makes sense with your style and your talk.
Yeah, this is also going the other way around, because I'm a huge fan of Joe Armstrong. Joe Armstrong is the co-author of Erlang, and I really enjoy his. He have a couple of talks on YouTube, and so at some point there's one he is moving a lot, and there's one that I would guess the stage that he is on. He was not supposed to move because at some point he do have the projector. The screen projector on his face and whatnot while he's moving. So I mean, it was funny that you were saying that, but I get it. It's a totally different thing to talk, but the stage presence is also, we are not actor, we are software engineer. So I mean, it's a tough skills to handle at first. I believe I would guess I never really did that.
I think so. This is an area that I'm consciously trying to improve at because, as I said, the last talk I gave, I was very aware I felt my stage presence wasn't as strong as some of the other speakers on the day, and I'd like it to be better. So, this is something I'm going to be working on. And I guess that's a good thing to call out, is everyone's at different stages in the speaker journey. Some people, it will be really hard to give the first one. Some folks will be really comfortable with it. And don't really have many changes to make. So it just depends on where you're at. But don't watch people on YouTube who are incredible and think, well, I can't speak because I wouldn't feel confident doing it how they do it. Like, everyone's got their own way of delivering talks, and I think I mentioned it at the start of the episode, but the audience really is on your side, especially if if they know it's your first talk or one of your first. They really will support you, and they want you to be successful, which is really, really nice. It's hard to explain how that feels until you're in the moment, but you really do feel supported by the audience generally at these conferences. And to be honest, if anyone in the audience wasn't being supportive, I think you'd find they'd be asked to leave fairly quickly. Like, these are very supportive environments with code of conducts generally. So, don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Sounds good. I mean, I would say maybe the hallway track conversation after that is also very interesting, I would imagine.
The hallway track.
The hallway track, meaning that after the talk, when everyone is exiting their room, you are speaking with everyone. Does the people came to you and talk to you about the talk? Do you have a lot of questions?
Yeah, sorry, I've never heard that phrase, hallway track. I like it a lot. It's a nice way to describe it. It depends on the talk. I've had some incredible moments with folks after some of my talks. The talk I gave in Singapore at GopherCon was like very personal. It was about how I use Go to manage my diabetes. I've got type 1 diabetes, and it means I have to be very careful with monitoring my carb intake and my blood sugar levels and stuff. After the talk, someone came running up to me and said, I've never met another type 1 before. It's so nice to meet someone with the same experience that I've had, and your tool sounds really helpful. Like, I'm going to build something like that too. And I think, as someone who was nervous to give the talk, to get someone come up to you like that, even if no one else cared about my talk, like, that makes it all worth it for me. So, you never know what impact your talk's going to have. So, even if it's just a story of how you started a side project or some contribution you made to an open source project, you might be the person to inspire the next person to do it, which is, one of the best feelings you can have, I think.
Yeah. Would you say that it could be a good first idea for someone to talk about a project that they have done, instead of trying to come up with a talk that, I don't know, teach a more abstract concept, for instance. If it's an open source project that you have built, or anything that you have built yourself, you are completely in control of what you're saying. You're not trying to teach anyone. You're just trying to show what you have done. Maybe it's easier potentially.
I think so. It really does depend on what the conference is hoping for, but you can always adapt your talk to like the conference, right? So for example, say you've built a side project which is very customer centric, or it's a SaaS, or maybe you built an application or something. There may be conferences that'd be really interested to hear about the more customer side of it and how Go helped you achieve like low latency, high performance, how you got to ship quickly. Like that's one interesting angle. But there may be other conferences where they might be more interested in diving deeper into how those things were achieved. So maybe you talk about how you use tracing to make your application faster, or how you found a trick on how you can reorganize your structs so they use less memory, things like that. I've seen talks on all of these things. So the same sort of concept and idea can be adapted and reused a few different times depending on the conference and like what technical depth they want to go to. Usually when conferences make call for papers, they usually are pretty specific. They'll say, we value technical depth, or we welcome talks from first-time speakers and things like that. So, make sure you read the call for papers and just adapt whatever idea you have for potentially what they're looking for, and you'll be able to be successful there.
Is there any back and forth when you are sending your CFP? Are they giving you some feedback, or it's accepted or rejected kind of scenario?
Typically, it's accepted or rejected. But one thing you can always do is follow up and ask and say, hey, I noticed my talk was rejected. Do you mind giving me a little bit more feedback? And I found that most conferences I've been rejected from have given me excellent feedback. And one time it was incredible depth. They really do take this seriously and know that people put a lot of time into these things. So, that's how I can say from experience that sometimes they say, hey, this talk is actually great, but it's just not right for our conference, because I've received that feedback before. And also I've seen feedback like, your talk was good, but we had too many, in a similar sort of idea or theme. So we went with someone else this time, but thanks for submitting. So you won't typically get feedback unless you ask, but feel free to ask. But as I mentioned, there's tons of people, probably in your network or definitely on Twitter, who would be more than happy to give you some feedback before you submit. So, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, totally. That's interesting. I mean, it's it's all about getting out there at the end of the day, and conference talk seems to be, probably the most difficult part, I would say. So if we have some advice for the listener, if you're not out there already, you see often the build in public tag on Twitter, for example. I mean, this is an easy one. Post about yourself, talk about what you're doing, write a blog. I mean, reach out to me if you want to come up as a guest on this podcast. Whatever you do, there's always things to do before jumping to a conference call, I would say. But definitely this is something I want to do for a long time myself. But I mean, there's a lot of technicalities that are difficult for me. Just getting myself to the conference is difficult for me. Taking a plane alone, I cannot really do that as a blind person. There's a lot of, mobility challenges for me. But yeah, I would encourage people to try anything. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything that we haven't covered?
I think I would encourage people to take you up on your offer there. I think, if you are interested in maybe getting yourself out there a little bit more, building your personal brand, I think, take Dom up on his offer and come on this podcast. I think one really nice thing about podcasts, and you often don't see this, but unlike a conference talk where it's recorded from end to end, like podcasts, there's things we can cut out. If conversations don't really work, or maybe you don't know the answer to a question, you don't want to talk about it, that you can just kind of flag it to the host and they can crop bits out. So it's a really nice and safe way to get comfortable having maybe a more technical conversation or testing out an idea or testing out putting your personal brand out there. So, if speaking or growing your confidence with talking and is something that you're interested in, like you should take Dom up on this, because I think people love podcasts where you've got lots of guests and there's more of a discussion going on. And, as I say, if there's anything that that doesn't kind of pan out, that maybe the conversation doesn't go where you want it to go, I've always found Dom to be really, really friendly and welcoming, and it's a really safe way to kind of practice and get comfortable with being a public speaker.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm a nice person, I think. I try to be an easygoing.
You are.
You do have reached a lot of subscriber on your Twitter. How do you call that? The Twitter community. This is very, very impressive.
Yeah, I think it's just been built up over time. I think generally I just try and be as kind and helpful as I can to folks on Go Twitter, and it pays dividends. Like I get to speak to lots of really interesting people, and I get to do things like this. And all of it just started with kind of putting myself out there. I think it was last January I really started trying to, I guess, be more present in the Go community and helping where I can, because I'd received lots of help before and I wanted to give it back to other people. And the amount of really amazing opportunities and people I've got to meet since then has been incredible. I really do think the Go community especially is exceptionally friendly for the most part. When I compare that to some of the like the JavaScript debates and things I see on Twitter versus the discussions the Go community has on Twitter, it's definitely a much friendlier place. So, come join us. Yeah.
There's way more people on the JavaScript though. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe if we had that many developers, maybe it would start to be a little bit rough. I don't know. It's interesting to evaluate.
Yeah, perhaps. I guess hopefully we'll find out one day as Go takes off even more than it has now.
I don't know. I see a lot of people. I see the interest in Go, and I'm really, really happy about that. It seems to be steady and it does not really drop. I would even dare say that it's getting more and more popular. This is interesting, because when you think about that, this is such a verbose language that I can understand someone that is writing Ruby on Rails, for example, might be. I mean, they might see Go as, no thanks, that's not for me. At first, just before that time when you start to realize all the benefits, at least at the beginning, performance and speed of compilation and whatnot, and just the security of having a static type and whatnot. I mean, this is I can understand that from the exterior point of view. It might not be the sexiest language out there.
Yeah, perhaps. But I think some of the tooling is incredible, and I think success of a language sometimes comes with enterprise adoption, right? You see some really big companies starting to use it, and obviously it's incubated within Google, which gives people a lot of confidence that it's going to be around and being sort of stewarded in the right way, even though there's been some controversy about the iterated proposal for the next version. But generally, people feel pretty good about Google stewardship, I think. So I think as long as those things will continue, we'll continue to see growth. But I think, I don't know, if I was a betting person, I would be watching Rust and I'd be watching Zig. I think those languages are going to continue to grow too, I think.
Yeah, personally, I do have a small preference for Zig, to be frank, just because it's similar a little bit to Go in terms of its simplicity. I mean, Rust, I would like to love Rust. Might be strange to say, but each time I'm trying to say, you know what, let's just build something small in Rust, and like, this I don't know, there's a lot of things. My mind is I'm old now. I'm very I don't know. I don't have the energy that I had before, and to be frank, Rust is hard. It's hard to just start. The learning curve is steep, to be frank.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I spent sort of 3 to 6 months just playing around with Rust and trying to get familiar with it. And there's some bits I really liked about it. I liked some of the more functional paradigms you can do. It took me back to my old camel days. But generally, I did find it definitely very challenging. It's just a different mindset shift. I found Go kind of hard to start with, if I'm honest, too, coming from Java, just because of the lack of structure for at least like project structure, which I know is something people struggle with a lot. And I ended up in a lot of situations where I had the dependency import cycle error that I really struggled to figure out how to fix. But I think you just got to stick with something for a little bit, don't you? And you start to learn the patterns, and then it all makes sense. So I just don't think I ever reached that point with Rust where it all clicked. But I'm sure if you stick with it, you can reach that point, because I know a lot of people who absolutely love it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this is interesting, and wow, OCaml. This is something we will need to expand at some point. I received Marianne Montagnino last week. She said something about structure, because I'm always saying, I know that this is an issue. Let's face it. Let's be real and frank. People that try Go they have difficulties having a blank directory at first. Nothing, no structure whatsoever. And I'm not understanding that. But she said something very interesting. I mean, this can be, people can be nervous when there's nothing at first, and it made me realize that, you know what? Yeah, this is true. I can imagine that when you are trying something new and the only thing that you have is a compiler, and now you need to create your first file, and you don't really know how to structure your thing. This is interesting, but I mean, at some point, is it not something that the Go tool should take on itself then, to have some kind of scaffolding inside there? Or it could be a project. I mean, it could be, there is certainly some project that do that. And yes, for Cobra, for example, you can scaffold a thing like that. But I mean, I don't know. There's something to be there's something to talk about, to think about for structure.
Yeah, I think the main problem here comes from the Go community's general desire not to use frameworks, right? Because if you think about all the other languages where people are used to having very structured ways of writing it, for example, let's look at PHP. You can just make an index.php file and put codes everywhere, but people rarely do that anymore because Laravel has got such huge adoption. And Laravel is incredibly opinionated about how you write your code, and it helps you with project structure, and you generate most of your stuff. So it's very productive, and it solves the problem of, I need to think about my package structure, because it kind of tells me how to do that. And then there's a bunch of frameworks like Next.js as well, where it actually routes, like you need to use a certain package structure, otherwise you're going to break the routing. It depends on it. For Go, we have stuff like Encore. Encore is pretty opinionated about how you organize your projects, which is very helpful. So if you don't want to worry about those things, there are frameworks available to you in Go that can remove some of this overhead. But generally, the advice and guidance and the idiom for Go is to not depend on frameworks too much, which I think is where some of this head scratching comes from, because that kind of breaks the paradigm that maybe you're used to coming from some other languages.
Yeah, totally. This is how I'm phrasing it in my first book that I wrote, my first course, let's say. How can you make a choice of framework if you don't really know the bare metal? So that's why I really like people to start with the standard library, and after that, if you want to use something, then you can at least do a good choice. When I started with Go, I started because at some point I woke up. I was having a SAS at that time, and it was Node.js. At some point I woke up in one morning and I said, I'm tired. It was mainly callbacks at that time. It's very old. Promises was not really there. But the point is, I took a framework. I don't even recall what it is because it's not there anymore. But the point is, I took a framework without really knowing. But if I had knew better, I would have been way better with just the standard library, because it's difficult at first. But yes, in the long run, you can open an old project 5-6 years ago and it's still built. It might still build as well with a framework and whatnot. Let's say you are doing, let's say you have picked a router like Chi or Echo, for example. it might still work, but I don't know. I really enjoy the fact that before choosing something, it's easier to understand what's going on underneath.
Yeah, and I can give an example from my experience here too. Like I kind of joined the workforce as React was becoming popular, or at least at the company I was working at, React was becoming popular after Angular 1. And so I learned very basic JavaScript at university, and then I actually started writing React pretty much straight away. And I am semi-competent in React. I wouldn't say I'm good at it, but I roughly understand the life cycle, and I can make apps work. But because of how I learnt to write front ends, I would say I don't really know JavaScript. Like I definitely don't know JavaScript to the depth that folks who, started out with raw JavaScript and then learnt jQuery and then learnt the frameworks on top have. And so, if people say to me, do you know JavaScript? I tend to say no, but I know React. And I don't think that's the right way to learn things. If React stopped being popular tomorrow, which, according to JavaScript Twitter might be true, I see lots of other frameworks becoming increasingly popular. I'd have to start from square one, and I should go back and learn like the absolute fundamentals of JavaScript before I learn a new framework. And I think if I did start doing more front end work, I think I would do that. I'd go back to basics because I've never actually really learned a lot of the depth that I really feel like I should do.
Yeah. I started with HTML3. I saw HTML4 coming in, so I'm pretty. Yeah, it's the other way around for me, and yeah, that have the other impact for me. So when came the time to choose any framework, I don't know. It's the JavaScript is so. Oh yeah, that's another discussion. Maybe we will need to reschedule this discussion because I mean I don't think we have time to enter there. But yeah, that's a good point. That's a very very good point. So let's wrap up, Matt. So would you say that if someone is sending a resume and there is some conference talk or any kind of blog or open source project on their resume, this is already a plus for someone that is hiring a software engineer?
Yeah, it definitely helps. It shows passion and interest in the potentially the language or the job beyond sort of day-to-day work. It also potentially gives me something to go and read and watch before we even interview, right? So I can learn a little bit more about you. So I think it certainly helps. I think, as I say, in the market at the moment, anything that you can do to be a differentiator, you should consider doing. But more importantly than that, if you can find a passion for your job, like you'll have a much better time at work than if you feel that it is just a way to earn some money. I think as a software engineer, I don't know if it's unique, but one thing about being a software engineer is you have to be always learning. The best software engineers are always learning. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to learn every language, but it does mean that you have to kind of keep your skills fresh, which means investing in training. And one of the best ways to do that is to go, oh, I just heard about this cool library or tool or thing. Let me do a short talk about it, or let me write a blog about what I'm going to use it for, and then maybe write a follow-up blog about what I ended up using for, why I liked it, and maybe why you should use it too. So I wrote a blog recently on SQLC. I wasn't familiar with SQLC, but I heard everyone talking about it, right? So I spent a little bit of time figuring it out, looking at it, and I was really impressed by it. I thought it was excellent. It kind of flips the ORM model on its head. And so I actually use that now as like my primary way to kind of interact with a database in Go. And if I hadn't have seen people talking about it and gone and experimented with it, I'd still be using the slightly more old-fashioned ways of just using like raw PGX. So, even, I've been writing Go for 6-8 years at this point, I think. I can't remember exactly. I'm still learning new stuff like every week, I would say.
Yeah, same for me. Same for me for SQLC as well. I mean, it's crazy because I checked them a long time ago. I think it's episode 5 where I talk about databases. Maybe it's 2 years ago, and for some reason it did not really click. I retested it recently, and I'm just like, wow. Okay, that's it. That's all. I'm going to do that now. So yeah, same experience as you. So if you haven't check it. I mean, it's worth because to me, database was always the most verbose in Go. The thing that I did not really like to write because I did not really like GORM and all the ORM approach and things like that. I really like SQL or SQL, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I really don't know, but yeah, same here. It's really a nice piece of library. Cool, Matt. So thank you very much. I mean, if people want to check out what you are doing, you have launched a book recently on debugging as well, a follow-up to your course, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. If you wanna see where I'm up to, you can find me on Twitter. It's Matt James Boyle. And then the book that Dom's referencing is available on bitesizedgo.com. Yeah, this is my second book. This is the first one I've self-published. Self-publishing is interesting. Maybe that's another discussion for a podcast, like self-publishing a tech book. But I learned a ton along the way, and it's been really rewarding, and I've been getting some great feedback on it. So check it out if you're looking for your next book to read on the commute to work, perhaps.
Yeah, and join the community as well. We will have all the show notes, all the links in the show notes. It's time to close. I am losing my communication skills, by the way. All right, thank you very much, Matt. It was great.
No, thanks, Tom.
Bye. All right, that's it for this week. I would really appreciate if you can talk or share about this podcast. It's always helpful. Also, another way to support this show is by purchasing my course. There's always a link in the show notes. So on that, see you next week.